books in the back, and there are still some other things there. Slavic, were you able to get the camera running? Okay, good. Like I said, technology absolutely hates me. But we are on lesson 2, so we're still answering this one question of why do we believe there's a God? Now, I decided last week to go with the strongest evidence first, and I kind of skipped straight ahead, and I ran straight toward the finish line and said, this is how it is. But as we go through this material, I'm going to use the marker board tonight a little bit, just so that we can kind of unpack some of these details. When you're dealing with the idea of is there a God, it leads to this question of, is there enough evidence out there that I can see that there is at least a God? The next question comes is, well, biblically speaking, how do I believe that there's the God of the Bible? And so there's 2 questions we need to look at. The first question is there a God? All right? And then the next question is the Bible's God the real God? All right? So those are 2 different questions. There's 2 different setups. And I decided to just make a run straight for the end zone. And last week, I really just nailed down that question right there. This week, I'm going to be a little more general. Because what we can do is we can look at the Bible. We can look at fulfilled prophecies. We can look at evidence from history, archaeology, all of those things. And we can say, where I can test the Bible, it validates what the Bible says. There's obviously going to be a lot in the Bible we can't test. So we're taking it just on faith. But what Jesus says, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and all of them, and he says, hey, if you don't trust me for earthly things, why do you think you're going to trust me for heavenly things? And so what we do is we come and we say, the Bible makes claims about the Hittites, and the Bible makes claims about Jericho, and the Bible makes claims about Christ and what the life was like, and we can verify some of that. Some of it we can't. Some of it, the archaeological evidence just isn't there anymore. But we can find an embarrassment of riches when it comes to archaeological evidence for the Bible. So we can stand back and we can say, yes, there are questions I have about, how many years really was that? And why are there, whatever. There are questions we still have, if we're being completely candid. But what I dealt with last week is just that simple question of Christ himself proves there's a God. The Bible points, and like I said, hundreds of years before the fact, points to what Christ would suffer on the cross. And that really just lays down some evidence right there. But what I want to do tonight is I really want to dig into this idea of, okay, let's say someone's not quite willing to go there yet. What is some of the evidence that we can point to that basically just says we can at least get to the agreement that there is a God? Now, this is where I say you've got to be careful, because you're going to get into a study, and it's called intelligent design. Now, the idea of intelligent design is simply there is evidence for a designer. That's it. Doesn't tell you who that designer is, doesn't tell you what his name is, doesn't tell you his identity. But some of these general truths that I bring up, all they're going to do is they're going to point to the idea that there is a God. Now let me show you in the Bible where some of this is found. Look at Psalm chapter 8. Psalm chapter 8, and again, this is like point 3 in our question. So we covered points 1 and 2 last week, kind of at the same time. But what I want to look at tonight is Psalm chapter 8, and I want you to look at verse 3. Psalm chapter 8, verse 3, you probably know this one from heart. Once you start saying it, you're like, I know this one. But you start off in verse 1, it says, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth, who has set thy glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings hast thou ordained strength, because of thine enemies, that thou mightest still the enemy and the avenger. And then what David does is, you imagine David sitting out on a hillside, he's looking up at the stars, and he says this, when I consider thy heavens, the works of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. What is man, that thou art mindful of him? And the son of man, that thou visitest him? For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. Thou madest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet, all the sheep and oxen, yea, all the beasts of the field, the fowls of the air, the fish of the sea, whatever passeth through the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth. And so what are you seeing? You're seeing that we can look around us at creation itself, and our eyes naturally draw upward to glorify God for it. Again, I don't know if you've ever been up to the redwoods or some of those places, but I find myself in awe when I walk through the redwoods, and you're just like, God created these things. These are toys in the hands of God. Like, that's how big and powerful these things are. Like if you've ever driven across the country and you're like, I have driven miles and miles and miles, and I barely scratched the surface of what this planet has, and this planet is a tiny speck in the grand scheme of things. It's absolutely ridiculous. And yet God goes, yeah, I'm going to die for mankind. Like just putting yourself in like how small you are compared to the grandness of creation, it should draw our eyes up toward God. So again, that's the first passage. If you go to Job chapter 38, and we're going to come back to this in a few weeks, because what happens with Job is questioning God's goodness. He's questioning really like, what is going on? I kind of want my day in court. I don't know that God's being just with me. And what God does is God just steps in and God starts showing off his power. And the way he does this is he just starts talking over and over and over about all the things in nature that Job has no idea about. And what I find amazing, I've been reading a book. I read it years ago, and I'm in the process of rereading it. It's called The Case for the Creator by Lee Strobel. And Lee Strobel goes through and he interviews all these well-known scientists. And he basically says, okay, what is the evidence in nature that points to a designer? Like, well, what is the evidence? And I mean, they just start unpacking. And I don't know if you guys have ever looked at like the cilia, which is the little hair-like things on a bacteria or in your throat. They're these little hairs. But what they do is they rotate like an outboard motor. Like they have little bushings and they have all these little parts. And they are some of the most efficient motors. They literally are the most efficient motors. I can't remember if it was the cilia or the flagella. They're both different types of like little motors. But they said these things can rotate 10,000 RPMs, and they can pivot on a quarter turn and change directions and immediately start rotating the other way if they need to. So think about like in your car probably tops out at like 7, 8, maybe 9,000 RPMs, and you don't dare while you're driving pop that thing into reverse, because otherwise you'll strip everything out from inside if you could even do it. You're definitely not doing it on a quarter turn of a rotation. And these little motors that help the bacteria get around are literally, the only reason we can understand how complex and amazing they are is because we've built stuff similar to it, and now we can start to appreciate like the bushings and all the moving parts, and you're going, this is ridiculous. They said you could contain like the DNA is so compact, you could contain like all the information for the humans, like all your cells, and then have enough room left over to store basically the information in all books in a teaspoon of DNA. Like, that's how efficient and compact that information storage system is. And it's found inside of our bodies, and it duplicates, and it copies, and again, all of this stuff. And so what Lee Strobel does in this book is he basically just interviews all these different experts in the fields, and he says, what is some of the evidence that naturally points toward a designer? Like this is ridiculous. And he just does, like for hours, he just goes through all of these facts. And there's so much that is just so specifically fine-tuned that you have to stand back and go, I don't know much about him, but I know he's amazingly intelligent, and he's amazingly creative, and he's amazingly powerful. Because again, take just that outboard motor. Go look it up. Go look what a flagellar motor looks like. It literally looks like something that was designed from, in a lab. Like it looks like an engineering marvel. And it's got all these complex parts that weave together, and you go, well, how does that just accidentally come together? The natural answer is it doesn't. But what we should do is even just the nature draws our eyes to God and goes, wow, that is fantastic. But then once you get deeper and deeper and deeper, it's design all the way down, and you're going, it just keeps getting better. And so like when Darwin first theorized the theory of evolution, he thought the cell was just this little blob of goo that didn't do a whole lot. And from under a microscope, that's what it looks like. But as we've gotten to the electron microscope, which can zoom in way, way farther, we're seeing more and more detail to the point that we're going, yeah, there's no way. There's no way this is just a single-celled organism. Like that, no, this does not come about by chance. Like there are details in this stuff that is absolutely ridiculous. And you start unpacking all the way down. And so I want you to notice this, because when we get to Job chapter 38, specifically verse 31, look what he's doing. Like God is appealing, basically comes back to Job in Job 38, and it says, "The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is he that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up thy loins like a man." And so the beginning of Job 38 is God coming to Job, and we'll get more into this later. He comes to Job and he says, "Job, you're questioning a lot about me, but I just kind of want to, let's lay our credentials on the table here real quick, and let's just make sure we're both dealing like peer to peer. All right, so what are your expertise, Job? All right, so let's bring on the best, and let's have this discussion." And so Job, throughout this whole thing, has basically been saying, "I want my day in court. I don't know that God's dealing righteously with me." And so God says, "Okay, what do you have to say?" And what God does is God simply starts showing off his power to remind Job, none of this got out of my control. Like none of this at any moment was me, "Oh, I can't multitask like that." And so look what he says. He says, "Job, gird up your loins like a man. Put on your man pants. I'm going to demand of thee, and I want you to answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who has laid the measures of it? If thou knowest, who stretched the line upon it?" And so he starts using all this building terminology to say, "Were you there when I built the earth?" You weren't? Okay. And he keeps going. And verse 7, where was the foundation fastened? Where was the cornerstone fastened? When the morning stars all sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth as it had issued out of a womb? When I made the cloud a garment thereof, and thick darkness the swaddling band, and I break it up for the decree." He's just going through all these things he has power over. And he's saying, "Job, I'm doing all of this at the same time. I want you to know I never lost control of you. I never, it wasn't like I turned my back, got distracted, turned around, and I burned the eggs. That's not what I did, Job. Every step of this was intentional. Every step of this was under control. I never let go of the wheel, so to speak." And he goes through all of these, and he "Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Hast thou seen the treasures of hail?" And he goes down through. But then he starts getting to astronomy. He starts talking about the stars. And what he's doing is he's pointing, he's saying, "You see all those constellations up there and how they work, and how you can only see these constellations from Earth. And so they have a message for you, and they have just a kind of a signal of God's power." And he says this, "Canst thou bind the sweet influence of the Pleiades?" Which is a constellation we can still see today. It's still known to us today. He says, or have you loosed the bands of Orion?" And so if you look, you're noticing that the 3 stars that make Orion's belt, he's saying, can you loosen Orion's belt? Just unzip that thing and his belt starts getting a little bigger. Can you do that? Because I could. Which is interesting. John Moore at camp, he's really into astronomy. He's actually mentioned that there actually is some evidence that the stars of Orion's belt are very, very slowly moving apart from each other. So that's interesting. So it's interesting that he says here, "Can you loose the bands of Orion?" But he says this, "Can you lift up your voice to the cloud, that the abundance of water may cover you? Knowest thou the ordinance of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth?" And God is just reminding us of all the power that he has. And if we were to do this today, he'd be like, "Hey, can you figure out the outboard motor of the flagella? Hey, can you figure out how DNA is stored? Hey, can you figure out how this information is he's using the science of Job's day and saying, "Job, were you there? Are you controlling all?" I mean, he even goes to "I know when the goats are giving birth, and I know all these things, and I built this little bird here, so if it steps on its eggs, it doesn't freak out. I just designed a bird like that, and so it's calm, and it doesn't even know what it just did. I didn't give it even the brain to process that." And what he's doing is he's saying, "Job, look at all these wonders of creation." And so that's what we can be comforted in, is again, the design itself points toward God. If we keep going here, Psalm 19 is another passage. In Psalm 19, verse 1, and again, these are all talking about creation and trying to point our eyes upward to say, when you observe creation and you marvel at it, take a moment and look toward the God who built it. When you look at that flagellar motor on that bacteria of all things, and you're going, "What on earth?" And he goes, "Look toward the God who designed it," and go, "That's amazing." There's some stuff we only understand because we build computers, or we build motors, or That's our understanding of things. I can only imagine the stuff we haven't discovered yet because we have not built a corollary to it, so we don't even understand what it does. But when you go into nature with the idea that there is a God who made this, then you start making these amazing discoveries because you go, this wasn't by chance. This isn't just a glob. This has a reason to exist. I love the guy who did a lot of works in genetics. His name is Mendel. He did a lot of work with genetics because he looked at plants and he said, we don't really know what all these parts do, but they must do something. And then he just started experimenting with thousands of plants to the point that he pretty much discovered the rudiments of genetics because he's like, oh, when I do this and this, why does that happen? And he started doing all these experiments because what he did is he realized all of these parts have a purpose. And if all of these parts have a purpose because God put them there must be something for us to discover. And what's amazing is even this idea of astronomy. They said the Earth is the perfect spot in the universe to see a solar eclipse. You cannot see a solar eclipse the way we see it on Earth anywhere else in our galaxy. Because our moon, proportionally, is exactly the same size as the sun in the sky. So the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but it's also 400 times more distant. So when you do it, when you line them up, they are perfectly aligned so that we can make all sorts of discoveries about gravity, about the nature of stars, about all sorts of things, because we can observe eclipses. And Earth is like the one spot where you can actually observe an eclipse like that and make those discoveries. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous when you start sitting back and you're going, something as simple as that. If you look at our position in the solar system, we have the right orbit in the right sort of galaxy solar system that we're not too close to the center where we're getting hit with all the supernova and the black holes and all the radiation. We're not too far away, so we're not getting like swept off into space. Our galaxy is pretty calm, so we're not getting like bombarded with all these others. You start looking at just everywhere you turn, you see all this specific design, even something as simple as where we are in our solar system. We've got the massive gas giants like Jupiter and all of those. They absorb so much of the cosmic junk coming in from outer space that it hits them first and protects us from things that would wipe us out. You look at some of the forces like gravity and stuff. It's just perfectly tailored where if gravity were substantially stronger, our planet would be super small and all this toxic gas would never escape. And if gravity were much weaker, all of that everything would escape out and we wouldn't have enough oxygen. I mean, the more detailed, the more you look, the more you see just all of these fine little details. They say it's like someone's been monkeying with the thing behind the scenes. And all of this together, you just kind of look at it and you go, oh, Lord, our Lord, how wonderful are you in creation? Like, this is absolutely ridiculous. And so again, you've got all of this stuff you can look at, and God is basically going to remind us, look at all the design that I put here. Now, by looking at nature, are we going to come to the conclusion of the biblical God? No, not necessarily. We are going to get to the idea that there's a God who's super powerful, super intelligent. We're obviously got to a God who cares something about us because he plopped us on a planet that actually we can survive on. But we're not going to know much about his son and the redemption story. We don't know all those details just by looking at nature. But that's where we put this together with this and we go, I get the whole picture. And so as we unpack this, even look at, like I said, Psalm 19. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. And so what he's doing is he's saying, as you observe creation and the wonderful things God's done, that's like a universal language that everybody can understand. Everybody can look at that and go, that's really cool. But what you start to find is because of a presupposition, because of an idea that people have that they say, I'm going to naturally reject the idea of a creator, they have to replace that with something else. Now, maybe next week or in the future we'll unpack creation evolution a little more. I don't have time to get into that and do it justice. But this idea of evolution, that everything just happened by chance, even if you take them at their word, their system doesn't hold up under scrutiny. There's so many details that just get lost in the mix that have to be assumed. One of the ones that they try, I'll just leave you with this one. One of the ones they try to do is because our universe is so fine-tuned, they say, we must be one of a multiverse. So that's the one they try to play out now. They use this illustration. They said, okay, Imagine you walked into a store, you're buying a suit, which I have done recently. But let's say you walk in and you're buying a suit, and you just so happen to find the suit that perfectly fits you. That's pretty amazing, right? But what if you walked into an infinitely sized suit store with infinite number of suits? You would be almost guaranteed to find a suit your size, right? And that's the logic they try to use. They say, oh, okay, our galaxy is just one of a multiverse. There's millions and billions and trillions of multiverses, and we just happen to be the one that works. Okay, here's the problem. Let's use that suit store illustration. Do suits just pop into existence? No. If you walked into that infinite suit store, guess what? There would have to be an infinite tailor who's infinitely making every single one of those infinite suits. So all you've done is kicked it back a level, and now you ask, well, where did the infinite tailor come from, and how does he have time to make an infinite number of suits? Okay, you haven't solved any problems. You've just played a mental game, and you've tried to trick people. And people really love the multiverse, but all that does is that pushes it back up a level to be like, are you telling me there's a multiverse manufacturing machine out there somewhere, just pumping out universes that just pop out and fail, and it just keeps going until one finally sticks? Okay, I thought we were talking science here. I thought we were talking about things you can observe and test and repeat. That's not science. That's just as much faith as anything I just said. And so to believe like we're going to solve the problem of the universe being perfectly tailored to us by making a suit illustration, that requires a designer just as much as a universe would. That doesn't solve your problem. And so what you see, though, is as you look through the Bible, you see this problem play out. And so we looked at Psalm 19. I want you to hop to Romans 1. We've spent a lot of time in Romans 1 in the church lately. And so I don't need to go through the full illustration of Romans chapter 1. But I want you to see this in action, because what is Paul doing in Romans 1? He says this: people are looking at creation and they don't like what they see because it has implications they don't like. Because when you look at creation and you look at the creative power and you look at all of that stuff, you really have no conclusion but to honestly say, there is someone who built this. Like, we wouldn't look around this building and say, this building came about by chance over a long period of time. You will never get a building like this, long period of time. It doesn't work that way. So if we can't build a building like this with all of the technology we've got built into this, why do we expect to have all these systems in place and they're all by chance? But we can't have something this simple by chance. And so what happens is people appeal to evolution and those type of things because they don't want to believe there's a God. That idea that there's a God is bothersome. And they're going to do everything in their power to try to come up with a way not to believe there is a God. And so in Romans chapter 1, specifically if you look at verse 20, it says this: for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. And they just keep getting clearer and clearer as you go farther and farther down the line. The more we study, the more we look, the more clearly they're seen. And he says, they are understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and his Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So Romans 1:20 basically says, we know for sure there's a God because we can look at nature, and that's just the natural conclusion we come to. We've got to try to come up with another answer. All right? Now, it's becoming a lot more easy today because, again, evolution and all those things have really pushed the line to say, you can be, like Dawkins, he's a famous evolutionist, he said, evolution made him an intellectually satisfied atheist. Because evolution is supposedly a way to explain it without a God. It can come about by natural processes. And then as you dig deeper and deeper, they have to come up with ways of saying, well, how would this happen by chance? Well, and they have to come up with a lot of weird ideas. And so what he's saying here is, you know it, verse 21, but because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful. But they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of an incorruptible God. So we're supposed to look at nature and be drawn upward to God, but they're looking at nature, and now they're looking like it's a God. And it says, these guys, this is nothing new. They changed the glory of God into an image made like unto corruptible man, to birds, to four-footed beasts, to creeping things, and so God turned them over. And that's what you see here in Romans chapter 1. And so again, we're looking at this idea of design, and we've covered a lot of details so far. But one of the ones I want to get to just before we close and you'll see it there in your notes. It's the idea of bad design, okay? Bad design, you'll see guys like Richard Dawkins, and you'll see other scientists who will say, okay, if we are designed, explain the bad design. And so they'll say, like, this eyeball could be a lot more efficient. In fact, some people have gone so far as to say the eyeball is badly designed because the retina, it's backwards. Shouldn't work that way. Okay, I don't know about you, but I think my eye's pretty good. And my eyes are broken, but they're pretty good. I can still do a whole lot with them. And what's fascinating, if you look at the eyeball, okay, so let's just unpack the eyeball, all right? The eyeball has a nerve that runs off the back of the eyeball and heads to the brain. This nerve is right in a spot, and it creates a blind spot in the eye. You don't even notice it for the most part, though, because you have two eyes, and their blind spots don't overlap. So what you can't see with one eye, you're seeing with the other eye, and so these blind spots are taken care of. But there's a blind spot because guess what? You need somewhere for the nerve to go back into your brain, and you can't have the seeing part of the eye on that nerve. And also, what's fascinating, yes, you do have some of the blood vessels and stuff kind of blocking things, but you have basically the equivalent of fiber optics that pick up the light, run it through the blood vessel, and hit the part of your eye that detects light and all that. So basically, we have the equivalent of fiber optics in our eye. It's fascinating to look at these details, and they can look at an eyeball and say, the eyeball is a stupid design. I'm sorry. There comes a point where you have to go, I can't take you seriously. You look at an eyeball, of all things. Like, you think about the clarity and the detail and all the stuff that comes along with an eyeball, and you're thinking that's a bad design because the blood vessels are up against the retina? Like, really? How else do you think that's going to get food? There's so much processing power right here. You need the blood vessels right there. And there's fiber optics that go straight through to where it needs. So it's not even look, when you look, you're not seeing red, are you? I'm not. Not unless I'm angry. Anyway, but I mean, that's that idea. Like people will actually look at the eyeball and they'll say, oh, poor design. The other one, they'll say with women, thare like, oh, your hips aren't wide enough. Messed up birth process. Come on, that's terrible design. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to build those things out to here? No, God is not designing perfect things. He's designing good enough things so they function within a certain level of parameters. I love the illustration one guy used. He said this. He's like, imagine a computer. He's like, all right, take a computer. Could this computer have a bigger screen? Yes. Would that make it better? Probably. Could it have a bigger hard drive? Yes. But again, what does that require? That requires more power. That requires more money. That requires more energy. That requires more space. What are you doing with a laptop? I need something that's small, portable, with just enough memory to do the job it needs to do. I don't need the most powerhouse computer to do what this does. I just need it good enough to do the job. And when you're engineering anything, that's what you do. You say, I need it big enough, I need it with enough memory and enough processing power. Otherwise, I have a battery pack that's this big strapped to the bottom of this thing, and it's a powerhouse. I don't need that. And so when you're thinking about the eyeball, I don't need an eyeball like a hawk. I don't need an eyeball that can process like every fine detail in this room. I need an eyeball that is good enough for a human who's walking at human speeds. I don't need all that extra special stuff. And so what I want you to understand is when we say that God said, he's like, I designed this world, and I said it is what? It is very good. All right? Think about it. What's a perfect gazelle look like? Perfect gazelle never gets caught, can run like nobody's business, needs just a little bit of food, and it can power it. So, okay, what's a perfect lion look like? Run really fast, nothing can ever escape from it, can jump 400 feet in the air. I mean, you think about a mountain lion, that's about as close to a perfect creature. Anyway, but you think about it like, okay, how do you have a perfect lion and a perfect gazelle existing on the same planet at the same time? Because one has to eat the other. It wouldn't be able to catch it if this one was faster and more athletic and could jump and fly. So what God is doing is he's saying, I'm going to give you enough. I'm going to give you enough stuff to survive. I'm going to give you enough stuff to survive. And guess what? Every now and then you're not going to. You know, turtle's slow. Okay? Imagine if a turtle was really fast. That would be awesome. But a turtle's really slow. But what has God given to that turtle to protect it? A shell that's nearly impenetrable. unless you have a bone saw. Or, but that's the idea. The turtle's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to be good enough for its environment, and it can adapt. And it's this hard little crawling rock thing. And you'll notice the really fast creatures are soft and squishy because they can outrun things. And the really slow creatures, they're really hard and they can like bunker down. And so what God's done is he says, I'm going to design you to be really, really good for your environment, but you're not going to be perfect. And so if we look around us and we go, that's poor design, there's probably a reason for it. There's probably like, this is the other one I love. Your breathing hole and your swallowing hole are right next to each other. We've all done that where we swallowed down the wrong tube and we start choking, all right? But all of us have survived to this age without swallowing our food down into our lungs. Why? Because it's actually a pretty good design. Now, is it perfect? Like, would it be more efficient to have a breathing hole over here so I could breathe while I eat, and have an eating hole over here so I could eat while I breathe, and they're separated by different mouths, and okay, that would just be weird. What does God do? He says, you got one mouth, you're going to multitask with that mouth. Again, give you two nostrils, there you go. You're going to learn how to breathe and eat and not do them both at the same time. There you go. You're good enough for what you need to do. But these scientists, they come along and they're like, well, I could make it better. Really? How? And you'll look in the notes and you'll see, I talk about this idea of, let's say there is such a thing as bad design, which I don't think there is. Bad design is still design. You can look at my handwriting on the board and you could be like, you could write more neat. Okay, yeah, I could. However, does that mean this was not written by a human hand because it's a little bit messy? No, we all understand this has details and qualities that show there's a designer. Bad design? Yeah. Could I have written it a little better? Yeah. Could I have drawn this eyeball in more detail? Yep. But that doesn't negate that there's a design. And so I want us to understand that again, a lot of what these scientists are going to do is they're going to throw these details at us. They're going to say, poor design, this is bad, I could do it better. Probably couldn't, but let's say you could. There's still evidence for a designer. You know, when my kids bring me a drawing, and I look at the drawing, I don't go, I could do that better. No, I go, hey, that's a pretty good drawing. It's pretty cool. I like it. Why? Because it's designed for what its purpose is. It's good. And so if we look at all the details in creation around us, our natural assumption should be, look at the great God we serve. All right, and so that's where we're going to end. I know there's another point to it all, but I did want to take a moment, and I do want to open it up for questions, and we'll unpack any extra details next week. But I wanted to kind of just dig into our proper view of creation. And so again, we've looked at the idea of what the Bible says. We've looked at the idea of evidence for a God. We put those together, and that's how we know the Bible's God. But again, we're still kind of building to a case. Questions or comments before we close, though? Joseph?
Yeah, the eye is amazing.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, my welding instructor warned me. He said I was on a building. I got welding, and my neighbor or my coworker aimed his sparks towards my eye and went in. And he said they had to cut out a section of his eyeball, like you could actually see a chunk. And he said I wanted to clobber the doctor. And he goes, the next day it was gone, like it was all healed up. And then I had my turn later in my career, and I'm glad he told me the story, because I looked in the mirror, there was a big chunk missing in my eyeball, and because I had a rust ring, so what happens is a piece goes in there and then it rusts.
Yeah.
And by 11 at night, you realize, I got something in my eye, so I go. So anyway, I had this chunk, and within 24, not even 24 hours, it was like it just healed like that. So it's
crazy.
Just, yeah, an eyeball is one of the most amazing
Yeah.
parts of the body.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that, again,
That's God.
yeah, I mean, what we do is, like I said, so one of the things, and we'll deal with it next week, it's the idea of God of the gaps. We keep getting accused of believing in God of the gaps. And summarize God of the gaps like this. I don't understand it, so therefore God must have done it. That's God of the gaps. I don't understand it, therefore it's God that did it. Okay. Really what it is this. We don't believe in God of the gaps because what we're doing is we're saying, I understand what it takes to program a computer. I understand what it takes to engineer an outboard motor. I understand what it takes to compile a book. And I'm seeing all these things in my systems, doing it automatically. that takes a level of programming and detail and intelligence. In every other case, why would it not do the same in my body? And so if we have an eyeball that is perfectly engineered, that is self-healing, what is our natural conclusion? It's not God of the gaps. It's saying, every other time I see this happen, this is how I explain it. Why would I then not take that same logic and apply it here? None of us look at these chairs and go, oh, these chairs must have come about by chance. No, even something as simple as a chair has evidence of design. Why would we not also? So, but yeah, no, that's a great point. Any other questions or comments? Tim?
I think too that something that takes place here is we're in a cursed world
Yeah.
as well. Sin
Yep.
came in and destroyed a lot of stuff, and so as perfect as we'd like everything to be, it's just we live in cursed bodies that are dying, a cursed world, and but
Yeah.
it's still amazing how amazing everything still actually is, even in a cursed world.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing that's amazing is we do live in a cursed world, and it's still as good as it is. Like, people keep screaming about the environment, and we're all going to die, but it's like, we still live in a pretty good environment, all things told. Like, and this is thousands of years worth of curse, and it's still this good. I mean, one of the things that I found amazing, I was just listening to today, they said some of these things where, like, the temperature will go up, and it'll trigger a response, and these microorganisms, they'll release stuff that causes more cloud cover, which causes the temperature to go down, and then they stop releasing those because the temperature's not there. And so it's this regulation of even some of these ecological cycles just happens. And you're like, what on earth? Like, that is insane that type of stuff happens, that God has built some of these regulation systems in. Now, we as humans, we do tend to mess it up sometimes. But it does a pretty good job of fixing itself on us. But yeah, we do live in a cursed world, so we have to understand some of these things go wrong because we're under the curse, and that's part of why some of these problems happen. Any other questions or comments? Mike?
I like this Romans 1. About the making the creatures.
Oh, yeah. Romans 1:20 or so. Yeah. I think it's 23, maybe.
When you just have like most of us have a general understanding of world religion, the Chinese and Buddha, the Indians and Hindu, and just you have this general view. But every single one of those views, every single one of those could be described in this one verse.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I say it's not new. It's just a new package.
It amazes me that, well, I suppose the answer, if I had to answer my own question which is, why do these other civilizations suffer under this delusion that these animals or that the stars or whatever represent, gods and whatever, it's that we have the chosen Hebrew people that have preserved the word. I was just trying to figure out why, how is it?
Yeah.
Well, he chose
Yeah.
babies.
Yeah, and God chooses to work through the Jewish people, and then now with the coming of Christ, he fulfills those things, and now the gospel goes out to all corners of the world, and you really do see that pantheistic nature worship stuff. It just kind of gets pushed back. So it's substantially weakened, but it's still there because mankind's still under the curse. I mean, they still darken their hearts, and But yeah, like you see him working through the Jewish people, and that pantheistic nature worship is everywhere.
My question was, how come these other people don't get it if they're looking at the same environment
But you see that today with evolution and all that. They are professing themselves to be wise. They became fools. And this is them. They're saying, I am not thankful to God for what he's done. And so God says, okay, well, enjoy your darkness. And that's, he darkens them. And that's why you see some, when they get exposed to the truth of Christianity, they accept it readily because it's what they've been looking for the whole time, or that's stupid. and you still see that response today, But, yeah. So, all right. Any other questions, comments? Dave?
I think if you drill a little deeper, you can even see redemption in nature.
Mm-hmm.
In that, if you study the universe, our universe, the source of all energy in this universe is the sun, S-U-N. Without the sun, there's no life. I mean, plant life comes from the sun. When you light a log on fire, it's releasing the sun, the energy that the
Yeah.
sun stored up in that tree for years. We'll study energy in the universe. It all comes from this S-U-N, sun.
Yeah.
And in the spiritual sphere, there's no spiritual life without S-O-N. And so in the sun, S-U-N, study it, it destroys everything it comes in contact with, will turn to dust, except for one cell, and that's photosynthesis. Everything else the sun destroys. And so the Holy Spirit's job is to convince men of righteousness, sin, and judgment. So you see that the Son teaches us that Jesus said, except a man be born again, that's photosynthesis, he cannot see the kingdom of God. So this God is going to judge the world someday like the sun. Everything will be destroyed by fire. If you're not saved, you'll be destroyed.
Yep.
So if you study that, you better get saved, because if not, if you don't have that photosynthesis cell, if you're not born again, God's wrath is going to bite on you someday. So you better be, the Holy Spirit needs to convince us of that we need the S-O-N.
Yeah.
We're going to perish someday.
So two applications that come off of what you just said. So if you didn't hear what he said, the idea of the sun itself, I mean, it really is a destructive force with the radiation and all this stuff. First one, it is not good enough to study nature and come to the conclusion that there is a God. That's why I don't stop here. That's why I think intelligent design can be just as dangerous as evolution if it is not taken to its next step. It is not good enough just to believe that there is a God. The Bible says the devils believe and tremble. Like, believing in God is not impressive. It actually should be a pretty default state. And for most humans, it is. But also, you brought up another point that's really good about God is going to judge the earth. And as we study out the depravity and the evil that mankind has done to one another, one of the questions that comes up a lot of times is, why didn't God step in to stop this evil in the first place? And the question that I'm going to ask when we get to that point in the notes is, just how involved do you want God to be then? Because if you're asking the question, why didn't God step in to stop, let's say, the Holodomor or the Holocaust or whatever? Okay, great evil. But what was that great evil? A whole bunch of little itty-bitty evils that built up and did a great evil. And so the question that we have to really just sit back and examine, and it's, again, a little bit ahead of where we are, if God unleashed his true power, he would consume everything. Our God is a consuming fire. That's what the Bible says. Like, he doesn't fool around, and if he unleashes, burns up. And we think that our little sin is not a big deal, and we condemn God for not dealing with the really, really big sin, not realizing that if he dealt with the really, really big sin every single time, we'd get caught up in it too. Because our sin is just as abhorrent in God's eyes as the big sin. Again, that's part of the thing. We'll get to it in our notes, and I'll talk about it. But there's a whole book called Ordinary Men, which is just like it sounds. Ordinary men who just did unbelievable evil, but they were just ordinary men. And we need to realize that we are all capable of that, except for the goodness of God holding us back. And so we just need to understand that there is a judgment coming. That's why we get the gospel out. That's why we do it the right way. Because again, it's that message of reconciliation that we're bringing to people to say, you do not have to perish. The judgment is coming. You will not escape. You think your sin is little and doesn't matter. You condemn people for the big sins that do matter. No, it's all the same. It's all going to get destroyed. You need to turn to God. So, all right. Final questions or comments or follow-ups? All right. Well, let's close in prayer. Mike, could I get you to close us in prayer, please?